you can increase farming yields for the average farmer by 4 to 5 times. We're just scratching the surface of what's possible. Um, and like the key missing things have just been we know very little about biology and we know very little about how plants work. So I think like we're we're not even like 1% in our understanding of that. So I think like for us it's translated to like at least for farmers getting a 30% yield increase from the first season.
Hey guys, in today's video, I have one of the most exciting conversations I've had all year. I am talking to Abhi Agarwal, the CEO and co founder of Living Roots. It's a startup out of Thailand which is focusing on improving the lives of smallhold farmers that are cultivating mostly rice at this point. And he has developed biostimulant products, so things farmers can add to the soil that helps them improve the yields. They've already achieved 30% yield increase with very limited cost. And that is super cool. But in the conversation, we touch upon how he uses AI and large language models to really generate new sort of like best practices for farming, sort of sourcing from thousands, tens of thousands of paper, best practices, combining things, and then he experiments right on his farm. He's got a really cool process of how he comes up with new product ideas. So I'm super excited to have interviewed him. And without further ado, here's my interview with Abhi from Living Roots.
So, Abhi,
Yeah.
welcome
Thank you so much for
to the
having me,
show.
Flavia. This is really exciting.
Very cool. Very cool, Abhi. You and I got introduced through a common friend. Alex is running an incubator in Asia, and it looks like Roots just got accepted. So just give us maybe like congratulations, and maybe just give us a quick like backstory, like what is Roots? How did you start it,
Yeah,
and where are you
absolutely. I
guys at?
mean, we're really excited to kind of join this accelerator. And that it's kind of really helped us like to move from like a, kind of like an agricultural agri-tech company to now like developing products and kind of getting to farmers really quickly. But kind of, like one liner about Living Roots is where Living Roots develops advanced biological fertilizers for farmers that harness symbiotic microbes and targeted nutrients to boost crop yields. So basically what that means is we use biology and kind of plant nutrition and build products for farmers that are easy to use. A little backstory for us is like we actually used to work as software engineers. So me and my co-founder worked in New York as software engineers for a long time. We were born and raised in Thailand. We moved to the US for work. And then, like through some kind of coincidence and kind of like different stories, we got the chance to start a farm in Thailand. So we decided to move back and kind of take the opportunity to start a farm. We started a permaculture farm, regenerative farm, like all of the things. Quickly learned that like it's not as easy as you think. And regenerating land is quite a hard thing to do. And, like it came with a lot of different challenges, like not finding good inputs, not finding enough good seeds, and like a lot of different things that compounded together. So then, both of us just thought about it and we're like, there must be a better way to do this. Like like compost is too expensive and you need a lot of it. And like we just kind of felt like biology and all of this kind of advances came so far, but there was no real easy way for us to start growing a healthy crop from like day one. And that's kind of like what set us on this path, which has been pretty awesome.
Very cool. And so you guys sort of have your own farm where you can sort of test stuff immediately, and then you leverage like what works. Is that then how does the process? Maybe tell us a little bit like because you shared with me in a previous call like actually how you came up and figured out which things to even test in the first place. So tell us a bit about that. How did you start from sort of maybe not knowing as much about farming and then let alone
Yeah.
regenerative farming to like sort of now having products
Yeah.
in place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really good question. And yeah, I mean, like the kind of open question we had and what we thought about was like we started to look at like a lot of research, just like things out there that people had kind of discovered, like the soul food web and like the Johnson Su bioreactor, and we were like, these are like such incredible pieces of innovation, but why aren't they kind of more mainstream? And kind of the question that like if there are a few of these research that like, are so good and like have really big impact on yield, there must be a lot more. So kind of what we initially started with is like we took, like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands kind of research papers, scientific papers that we got off Nature and almost all of the internet, like in Thai, English, Hindi, like whatever languages we could find them. And then we kind of split them by category, such as like germination or seed coating, farming techniques, foliar sprays, pesticides, herbicides, and like kind of split them across these domains so we can kind of dig a bit deeper. And we also took almost all YouTube transcripts from on YouTube as well for all like like lectures given on like sustainable rice production, like how people have done these things. And then um at the beginning, we kind of built out these very small models that took all of this research paper and kind of synthesized it. So we would develop like a model for biological fertilizers and see what kind of the top ideas and amongst all these research paper was and like kind of the similarities there. But like as things came out, like
But when you say
yeah,
model, sorry,
yeah, please go ahead.
I was just curious. When you say model, is that are we talking about some kind of like physical biological model, or are we talking about more like on the LLM side, sort of synthesizing all
Yeah.
the information to find the top
At the
ideas?
beginning,
Or
it was like that, like the LLM type things where we were putting it into like Google Gemini Pro and kind of any model with really long context windows, so we can fit as many papers as possible. Um, and then that basically took us from like 100,000 research paper to like maybe the 4,000 most critical research papers that we found were like these are the ones that
wow,
we believe are like like because there's a big intersection here between the future and kind of what sustainable agriculture means to us and kind of like breakthroughs almost and like what the next generation of farming could look like. So that's kind of like where we examined it. um yeah, and I mean it became really interesting like to have this kind of data set on LLM because it's basically like a very digital playground almost where you can interact with so much scientific data, and then you can like for like on Google Gemini Pro, you could create a new model and kind of take the best research from the previous kind of iterations of papers you use and fine
mhm,
tune it
mhm.
to what kinds of things you're looking for. Um, and then, I mean that's how we then took it to the the physical. Right, we took like for example, these are the best biological microbes for rice that have been researched across the internet. Like I mean, across like almost all science, and these are the key results people have shown. And so then we take it, then we can kind of test it out in the physical space. Yeah, if that makes sense. But it's quite a long journey.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love the process. I have some, if you don't mind, I have some
Sure.
technical
Yep.
detailed
Absolutely.
question with the process because um so one is just comparing to, right, these models, the LLMs now have been trained on, we don't
Mhm.
know for sure, but we know that it's been like essentially almost anything you
Yep.
can find on the internet. And so I'm curious about just like, did you ever go back then and compare back and just say, if you just ask same question, like one of the best
Yep.
microbes for rice, and you just ask that straight to like a native, GPT or Claude, is the answer from your database like vastly different, significantly better? Is it mainly about the sources it has? Like, what are sort of the difference between, obviously, you did a lot of work to get there, and how big is that delta in terms of like the
I would
output?
say it's quite big. Like the suggestions are almost 80 to 85% better when you have a very tailored data set. So I
Wow.
would say
Okay.
like it's a very pretty much a big night and day difference because I think it's looking at a very large picture, but when you give it a very specific thing like a context window, then it becomes quite good at knowing what to pick from it.
Yeah. It super cool. Okay, so it's really worth doing that work, sort of giving it the hyper specific papers. Then I'm curious about, like, papers have various. Well, I guess they can come from different
Mhm.
qualities, right? Like it could be, I mean, how they were written, but also mostly like, what's the study? Did they use large
Mhm.
randomized controlled sort of trials, or was it more like a observational study? And right, there's these different um there's almost like a ladder of how strong a piece of
Yes.
evidence is, and you have the meta-analyses, which sort of, if they're well done, you know, already like said, what's the word? Like put things together, pull things together from. Did you did you have your own sort of ranking mechanism, where you would say this is from a paper with a high impact factor, or this is a paper with randomized controls? Did you sort of like teach the tool about that, and then also but maybe it's interesting. Maybe there's something that's like super not yet proven it's novel, and it's only been covered in like one or two papers. You don't want to miss
Yeah.
that. I don't know. I'm just curious.
Mhm.
How did you play with
It, it's
those different
it's
like
definitely a
quality
bit of
metrics?
both. Like, I think the second one also applies quite heavily to me, especially because like so much of the ag research like has like like there's been kind of researches like the rhizophagy cycle, which like people discovered years ago, and then it was later picked up by another scientist like like recently and kind of made popular again. I mean, there's like so many of these. For me, I think there's so many of these like pieces of research that could be done by like a local researcher. Like I found like there's some rice like technique research that is done in Thailand where like with very small changes they actually were able to show 70% increases in rice yield. And for me, it's like why didn't like that is a like and then kind of repeating those things that are done in that article, sorry, that research paper actually gave us like above 50% like yield
Mm.
increases as well. Like, and so like for me, it's like
Wow.
they're
And these were, sorry, just to maybe quickly, sorry to interrupt you, but were these just forming management changes you made, or did you add anything to
no,
the
I mean,
soil, or?
these like this specific study was on alternate wet and drying. So like when you for rice, for example, you
Mm.
it doesn't always have to be flooded. You can swap it between flooding it and having like and flooding it and not flooding it and then kind of alternating it. And with these pattern changes, they were able to observe like a 71% increase in yield with at the at so like
Wow, just from keeping it
yep.
dry at times
Yeah,
versus having
and
it flooded.
like
Wow.
that kinda links
Wow. I'm a bit
it's
mind
it's
blown here.
it's quite mind-blowing because, like, there's so many, so many things that we don't know about, like, how much oxygen microbes need and kind of these techniques. Like, rice doesn't really need to be flooded. It's almost only flooded because for weed management purposes, but similar to all plants, like, having oxygen in the soil is really important. So I think there's, like, so much stuff there, but a lot of this research comes out from, like, local universities in Thailand who are testing out like novel concepts. It's very interesting when you pick articles. You
Interesting.
It's hard to discount because sometimes you find things like that are so like interesting, but no one has ever thought about it.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. And so this is type of paper that probably wasn't covered in, like, the main, I want to call
Yeah.
the mainstream, big, like, actuals. Was probably more, was it a more
Um,
local
no
publication, and,
publication.
and, and
This was
sort of
just like
like,
on the website from the
oh,
university
no
that I was
publication at
working
all.
at.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Oh,
it's interesting because.
okay. That's crazy, because you see, like, I'm,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead. No, no, I was just thinking that this would be, right, something that if you started, I guess if you had like, oh, I'm going to make this really rigorous scientific process, you would start like with the most peer reviewed papers, and then you would the most peer reviewed journals, and then you would maybe consider things that were a little bit more on fringes, maybe from a good researchers, like, but something that's just on a website, hasn't even made a publication, you'd probably just discount, right? Because there is a high chance that it wouldn't replicate, essentially, right? And so I'm actually curious about this, like, how did, and this linking back to how you built the process, like, this source you found, it's giving you the great results. So there's no doubt it was a good way to consider. How did you end up? Was it something in a model that told you consider this, or was it just in your own intuition? Like, how did that actually surface to the
Yeah,
top
it's
somehow?
it's definitely it's definitely the model because it sometimes I ask. I mean, because now we're interacting with like LLM. Sometimes I do ask what like because you can ask it questions, right? Sometimes my sometimes my prompts are what is the most unexpected pieces of research or like outlier research that
Mm,
doesn't make sense but can give good results. And then like because
right.
like that's the thing that has like really changed is you can find really odd outliers because it will give them to you. Like there's not actual reason. There's no need to dig through papers. You can be like, oh, which rank these papers by the amount of yields they increased. And then you can basically go through the top 10
Yeah.
and see what they did. And out of the top 10,
Right.
one, maybe a few will click and be like, oh, that actually forms my, like, cause like the cool thing is we still have to be here to take that data and kind of take it somewhere, but
Sure.
it can't do
Sure.
90%.
But I love what you just said. I think that was just a key. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was a key insight you just told me. Like, I think just, oh yeah, like rank it by yield increase, right? Like that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I mean, you would, and that would probably be if you have to do that by hand, right? It'd be an incredibly laborious task. You have to
Yeah.
go to each and every paper and then copy paste the yield increase, and I mean, it would take a lot of time, and you can just play with it. And unexpected is an interesting one, and then I guess I'm assuming then you read it and it was like, oh, okay, the
Mm.
oxygen will help the bacteria. There's something that clicked with you that said that could make sense. Probably because you had some, I mean, you've been reading papers as well, right? So you probably had some experience. Okay, that's
Yeah.
an interesting hypothesis. And so then I'm assuming you then took that and then you tried that first thing. Did you try that on your farm? You did like kind of an A/B test, or tell me about that process of okay, you have a hypothesis from the models.
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
go on
So
about
that's
testing
a
it?
separate part of our business. Sorry. Like that's kind of like where we take the kind of theoretical ideas in some cases where like we think that there's enough scientific data. We don't test it like in the rigorous manner that we would if it had improvements. Like in terms of alternate wet and drying, which is this example, there's like sufficient scientific evidence that it will work fine. Not just from small studies, but like large. So I think
Mm,
there's for that one we implement it on our farm and with our farmers because we're pretty sure that it will give people good results. But there are like certain things like like using like when we're building our seed coating product, that's like the one we iterate on the most, where we believe that you can give good nutrients and biology at the germination time for the seed. Um, and that leads to a better yield and outcome for the plant. And there's a lot of research here, but it's research that there's just so much research that you kind of have to start narrowing down and doing your own trials to see how to implement it properly. So, like what we've
mm.
kind of learned is our product iteration cycle just needs to be really rapid. Like building the product, trying it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so how do you do that? Because that's another
Yeah.
interesting question I have. Like, right, like, how do you? Is there like what's the minimal you've found, and is it sort of like after a couple of weeks can you retell? Right, if you had I don't know. I'm just curious. How did you narrow it down, if at all, and how good
Yeah.
does it work,
Yes.
and how well does it
So
work?
the great thing about having a farm and like people who are like kind of doing trials and things for you is like our iteration cycle for seed coating and kind of germination stage product is like less than a week. Like we can iterate something on Sunday and by
Oh
Friday
wow!
you can have good ideas on how it's performed because like what we're looking for is sorry.
Wait. Sorry, I need to stop you right there. Because I'm sorry
No,
to.
it's okay.
I interrupting you, but I'm just curious. You're seeing you're applying the product on Sunday, and by a week later, you have a yield difference
Yeah,
already,
so
or
for the seed coating product, sorry, for like the germination products, you're kind of looking at like optimal root and kind of like plant germination at the beginning stages of the plant. So like that is a very like specific trial where like for example, the plant is the
I
largest
see.
in 1 week, or the root depth is just so much larger. Like those things for us is like a good indicator because when it's out in the field, if the like for example with rice, like kind of random example, but like farmers use a lot of seed when they're planting rice. And if your seeds germinate faster, they have to use less seed because a lot of the seeds get eaten by birds as
Yeah.
well. Like when after you broadcast to the soil. So like
Mm,
if your product
right.
germinates one
Right.
week earlier, then there's 1 week less chance for the birds to eat the seed. So there's like a monetary they can
I
save half
see.
the money in the seed cost, which is like for a farmer quite a substantial difference. Um, you also lose less seeds to the weather if they germinate fast. I mean, this like this is kind of like a specific one, but for nutrient products and
Of
like
course.
biological products, you can kind of see not yield, but you kind of see the plant health difference like within a month. And yield, like for rice, it's about 4 months. So like like we can see the differences between the rice seasons, but during the rice season, we're also testing all bunch of things on the rice, like like can we make it grow taller, or can you increase the size of the rice plant? Can you improve the photosynthesis and different kind of um different kind of things around that. That's like quite quite rapid.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's super interesting. I'm just curious about that because I know from maize, like in certain cases, you actually, shorter plants are
Yep.
more preferred, right? Because I guess like one was like susceptibility to wind and at some point they would actually start tipping over if they were too big or I think there were I forget now all the reasons, but there was like a very specific, I think in the green
Yeah.
revolution, right? Like one of the key innovations was to actually make the maize plants may just grow faster to maturity. They don't need to grow as much like stem and stuff. So um what's your take? I'm just curious about like these biomarkers you mentioned. I guess it just needs to be validated that it actually also in the end will correlate
Yeah,
with higher yield.
definitely. No, these are all good questions. Like, like that those are a lot of really good insights. Like the way the plant looks isn't always an indicator of soil health, or the plant's health really. Like I think people, especially like in our area, have kind of started to think that like really green plants are just the healthiest plants. But like for us, we look at other indicators like pest and disease issues. Like certain pests mean that your plant is not at kind of the health it is. Like I think there's like a lot of research by like like a lot of different researchers. There's one interesting one about like bricks and kind of like plant bricks where you can use like a refractometer. It's kind of like a measurement of the sugars, dissolved sugars in
Mhm.
a plant leaf. So you can use this product called a refractometer. You kind of take a little bit of the leaf and you squeeze it into like a liquid drop onto the refractometer, and it's like a measurement. Let's say like 1 to 30, and so like like there's been a lot of studies where like plants below 12 bricks are more susceptible to specific kinds of diseases. So um,
Mm.
what you're basically aiming to do is get a plant to a place where it isn't susceptible to any kinds of disease. And then after that, kind of the yield expression takes its own kind of form. And like once the plant kind of reaches that health. But a lot of farmers in our area, for example, have like 3 to 4 bricks in their plants because of the use of different fertilizers or kind of the unoptimized agricultural process.
Mhm.
So the immediate goal is to get them to a really high plant bricks and kind of design products that increase plant bricks. And that's shown to be a really good indicator of yield. And that's mostly because, like plants that don't really have pest and disease issues are just stressed less throughout the season. And so with less stress, it has led to them being able to put more of their energy into grain production in the case of rice or fruit production. Um, but the kind of goal is to reduce as much stress that is not needed for the plant. Some stress is good, like like as much kind of unnecessary stress, and that kind of leads to good yields.
Mhm.
And so I think that's kind of like I like like there's so many different avenues here of looking at how a plant is healthy. The kind of out and but you can kind of take
Mhm.
all of those indicators to predict the yields pretty well.
I see. Okay, no, that's really cool, and it's something that I've been looking into a little bit as well. Like, can you use? I know there's some research indicating that there's these
Okay,
enzymatic
yeah,
signatures
yeah,
that you can use. So, um, the activity of enzymes in the carbon
wow,
cycle seems to be a more robust signal than some of the mRNA
okay,
immunogene expression data, which can vary a lot, even just in the presence of light or a different temperature. The enzymatic signatures, there's some interesting
yeah,
research I
please,
can send you from
okay,
Thomas Roig in Copenhagen that is looking at that, and he's built a whole
awesome.
pipeline around measuring that efficiently. Um, okay, so super cool. So if you had to maybe if you had to pick, I don't know, your top three markers of plant health,
Yeah, I
what
mean
would they
that's a
be?
good question.
For
Um,
rice,
yeah,
maybe.
I mean
Okay.
the thing for us is like we try to find as much budget friendly options as possible because for us like scalability of cost is quite good. Like, like farmers are making in Thailand maybe like $400-500 an acre, not in profit, but in revenue for rice. So like using tests that are above like $20-30 is already like quite a big margin for them. I mean, in some cases, we absorb that cost for our own research for kind of their work. Um, but like plant sap analysis is like really great, even though like not it's not a complete indicator. But what it can do is give you like a North Star direction that you're moving in this particularly good place. And it's a free test. You just need $100 equipment. You can basically scale it yourself. And the other one is like a plant sap analysis, like where you send like the leaves of the plant to a lab, and then they can tell you what nutrients are missing in the plant itself. This isn't in the soil. This is actually nutrients that are missing in the leaf of the plant, which means it doesn't have them. Yeah.
Right. So right, right. So sorry, the first one you said plant sap. What's the difference between
The
the first and the
bricks
second one?
is like a plant sugar. It just bricks. Yeah,
Oh, bricks.
BRIX. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, okay. Breaks and plant sap. Okay. Sorry, I'm confused the two.
Um,
Okay, got it.
and the last one, yeah.
No, it's super interesting. Okay, and those are
I
do you have a
mean,
third
the
one
last
or?
one is just soil like microscopy analysis. Like you can take the soil like immediately next to the plant and like look at it under through a microscope just to see like if any obvious group of microorganisms are missing. Like it's quite cost effective as well because maybe like $20. Or if you have someone who does it in house, then it's free.
You're looking at like entire. This is also interesting to me. You're it's just a visual inspection. You're looking at there's any like just by the shape of the microbes. You're looking at any
Yeah,
group is
so
missing or.
so like the work from the soil food web was that there's four functional groups of microbes. There's the nematode, protozoa, fungi, and
Mhm.
bacteria, and they all kind of need to be in sufficient numbers to kind of cycle the nutrients. So you're just looking at if there are any of them that are missing in sufficient numbers, and then you can kind of fix the nutrient. Like a plant, like a plant is just like just a a bunch of nutrients that it needs. So if you can kind of remake the pump from either the soil or the farmer applying it to the leaf surface or whatever form of like nutrients you want. Like, because our work, what we want to do is not waste any dollar for the farmer. Like everything that goes and the farmer buys should effectively help them increase their yield. And so like the problem with manure is you don't know what it might not have all of the things that you need in all of the quantities that you need. Um, and so like the kind of goal is to build products that have everything like in the quantities it's needed and no more, if that makes sense. Yeah, so then that's kind of like the goal.
Okay. Very cool. So just to summarize, we talked about three main markers that are relatively easy to test and cheap to test, which I guess
Yep.
is a huge advantage.
Yep.
Plant breaks, an indication of sugar levels, and
Yep.
more is better, right? It just means that the plant is going to be less susceptible to stress. And this is something you can test just by, you said like crunching a plant leaf, and you have
Basically,
some
a
kind of
refractometer. Yeah.
um yeah, direct spectrometer. Yeah, thank you. And the second one you mentioned was the
Yep.
plant sap analysis. This you do have
That's
to
right.
send to a lab, I assume, but
Yeah, it's
it's
like
quite
20
cheap
to
and it just tells you
$30.
the nutrients that are
Pretty
missing.
okay.
And the third one, $20, $30. Okay. And the third one is the soil health, just looking at these
Yep.
sort of macro groups, fungi or
Yep.
protozoans, nematodes, and looking at like, am I short on any of them? And then you could do a
There we
targeted
go. Yep.
intervention
Yeah.
if any of those are missing. Okay, very cool. No, I think it's simple to understand and very cool. So amazing. And then because we also talked in our previous call that you'd mentioned you'd actually started
Yep.
building some models. And now I'm not talking about a language model, but more sort of, I guess it's some sort of
Yeah.
plant health model, or I don't know if you call it a physical or chemical model, or tell me a bit more about that. Does it include mathematical equations, or like what's that? What did you do
Yeah.
there? And how does it work? Like in terms of the inputs you give it and then what it
Yeah.
can
I
predict?
mean, this was always kind of like what we wanted to do was kind of being, like the kind of like the dream is to put in the conditions of what is happening, like whether like your soil profile, kind of what you're growing, and at the time of the season you are, and kind of give you a recommendation of what to do. I think that's like like in most a lot of people's mind, this is quite what we want to do, and so that's kind of what we started off with.
The big
We
vision,
kind
yeah.
of like at the beginning we built kind of like this very simple regression model where we put kind of parameters of distilled down research papers, and that became like a supervised learning model, which was basically like a decision tree type model built from like these complex relationships
Mm,
between soil, plant, and weather, and a few other things and a lot of that was kind of condensed down from these research papers and made into something that works really well. So for example, like when we add specific nutrients or nutrient products to a plant or biology, what happens and how the plant adapts. And especially like at least initially it was in the theoretical sense, but actually like now we've kind of upgraded that a bit, and like we're still kind of in the interesting phases of this, but we know we started kind of using reinforcement learning with human feedback. That's kind of like the newer
mm.
models I've been
Oh,
trying
wow.
out. So yeah, like why we came to reinforcement learning is it's like reinforcement learning is quite a dynamic model. And like it's dynamic because it takes reward functions and feedback, and then in farming, like there's constant changes. So you kind of need a model that can adapt, and we were kind of reaching the max of like like the other models were just not able to kind of take a reward and kind of update all of those things. Um, but
Hmm.
like interestingly, we combined our work with the reinforcement model, and actually we used LLMs as well as the brain or the agent behind the reinforcement
Mm.
learning, which has been kind of great because
Okay.
now we have this kind of we have really powerful reasoning models and kind of models with LLM models with really large context
Mm.
windows. I don't really want to build a reasoning engine on my own because that doesn't really it's not like a great use of time. So we use reinforcement techniques to kind of tr- design the reward function and kind of the localized model, I guess, and then we use the LLMs for like um what was it called? The agents, I guess, to kind of provide the recommendation
Mm.
on what to do given a particular um tasks that need to be done. Yeah, so I think it's been really interesting because now our reward functions are like we can reward for both improve yields in the short term, but also in the long term
Mm,
soil health.
mm,
So now we can kind of try to look for
mm,
products that
mm.
not just this season will improve yields, but then 3 seasons down we can kind of start thinking about what how to improve the soil health, which
Oh, wow.
I mean, like we're still at the beginning stages, but like, like building kind of like a reward function of what crop health means, it's quite like a just different um work on its own. Yeah, but we took a lot of the data that we had from our trials and all of the research papers and all of the nutrient interactions
Mhm.
and like what is a plant, what diseases are caused by which nutrients missing, how nutrients interact with each other.
Right.
This is like quite a carefully tailored data set that we have made. Um, and it's basically like an agronomist in a box. But now the agronomist can learn.
Mhm. The state. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But if I get this right, I'm just trying to map this in my head. So this is the state sort of like the plant with all of its current sort of nutrient concentrations and maybe also the state
Yeah,
of the soil, and that each intervention like basically moves in that space, right? Will increase these nutrients, maybe, but then the plant grows, it consumes a little bit of these nutrients, and is that sort of how it works? And you move through that space of concentration, and I guess yield is sort of like your ultimate, um, label you want to optimize for, but you kind of move. I don't know. Is that
yeah, yeah. I
the right
think
way
I
to
think
think
it's
about
the
it?
right
Or?
way to think about it, and it allows us to get a bit more complex about what the different aspects of the plant are as well. Like now we've kind of moved to this LLM based reasoning model to understand the plant in a better way. So now we can kind of form kind of research around what happens in a plant when you give it nutrients and kind of have that context window be shifted to the LLM. And now like our local models need to really make sure that the rewards and kind of what is happening to the plant like we just have to now like look at yield functions locally and what it means to drive the yield, but kind of like what does calcium do to a plant? Now we've kind of moved that towards the LM where we have put a lot more research in the context window, if that makes sense.
I see. I see. Maybe just one more depth. So you have a plant state, maybe with some nutrients and whatnot, and then you say, okay, if I add calcium, what it does, it your LLM has either from papers or from specific. I don't know if you've given it even
Yep.
equations more specifically, and then the LLM then reasons about. So you then ask, is it then you ask the question, or is it the model is sort of I don't know. You're somewhere you have to define, okay,
Yeah.
adding calcium, and then it sort of um the reasoning the reasoning the LLM part
Yep.
reasons about that and says, does it give you an output like, oh, like these markers will change that much, and then that gets fed back
Exactly.
into the sort of state,
Yep.
the mathematical
Yeah.
model.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Wow. Okay. Wow. That's
It,
super interesting. That's
it's
really interesting.
it's hard
That's
to
really interesting.
describe because I think it's the first
Wow.
time. I mean, it's quite new, but like kind of the thesis behind it was that reasoning models are getting very, very good and they're able to reason very well. Like we use like the kind of local model we've built uses multiple different uses Cloud for specific things. It uses um like Google Gemini Pro for specific things and kind of like we have built multiple models. Like there's a biological plant model of what like the biology it is in the soil. And so like when you add a biostimulant, that model is what the LLM asks for, like, if that makes sense. And when there's a nutrient model, it goes to the nutrient model. Like it's still quite new, but I think there's a lot here
I
where
see.
we can develop scientific products, um, but with our own kind of base models, but while still using the reasoning capabilities of larger models as well. So I think there's like a hybridized model
Yeah,
system, I
yeah.
guess.
Wow. Wow. I'd love to at some point see
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
chart of like how the different
Yeah.
components interact, but I get like a high level take on it. And I guess my next question is like, how well will this work? What have you been able to, how have you thought about validating it, and
Yeah.
what's
I
been
mean,
the
the
outcome?
outcome for us has been really great. I mean, like we kind of the mission for us as a company is we think that, you can increase farming yields for the average farmer by 4 to 5 times. I think there is potential for even more. I think we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. Um, and like the key missing things have just been we know very little about biology and we know very little about how plants work. So I think like we're we're not even like 1% in our understanding of that. So I think like for us it's translated to like at least for farmers getting a 30% yield increase from the first season. So like we can create products now that a farmer can use, and they're all biological or nutrient based. They can spray it onto their crops, and like within the same season with degraded land, they can get a 30% increase in yields. And these are like the first products we have, like the first kind of release of our products. And I think we're very much looking forward to continuing to iterate on this process. I think that the really amazing thing we're looking forward to is now we will be working with thousands of acres of farmers. So just the pure amount of data that we can get is going to be pretty awesome to feed back in.
Yeah.
I th- I would really love one day to have IoT monitors and such on farmland. So like this reinforcement LLM type model can kind of run minute to minute, or even faster with these machines knowing what action to provide the farmer. Um, and then kind of the model also
Mhm.
continuously learning very rapidly. I think there is so much well potential here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like so much room. Like these things, really cheap LLMs have just really changed the whole equation for, and like I think it's getting very possible to start thinking about like doubling, tripling yields. And this is like super cool. Like this is even without like
Crazy.
gene editing or anything. It's just like doing what like access to what we have now. We can like gene editing and kind of all these like super new techniques that we're looking into. Like I think they will absolutely help like optimizing what we have now. Like what amino acids can you spray on a plant? What does that do? That is like a question. I don't. I That is a question which I think we will learn so much about. And that's across all the nutrients. Like how does calcium and X nutrient pair together on rainy days? Like there's like so much, or like how do we defend plants against really big rainstorms? So, yeah. Anyways, yeah.
No, no, I really could talk to you for hours about this because, I mean, now I'm just curious about, you mentioned these very specific questions. Are we at the point where the models, are we still like, oh, okay, it has to sort of have been in the training data, or in your case, I guess in that database papers, or is it already able to sort of extrapolate and say, well, I know about rain and rainy days, this, I don't know about, calcium and rainy days, but I know this about calcium. And then using some kind of physics based intuition, chemistry intuition, you can say, well, calcium and rainy days should have this outcome. Are we already at that
Yeah. I
point
mean,
where we can make such type of
I think
predictions? Like,
it can definitely get you to like 95% of the correct prediction. I think the last 5% is stuff that you have to
Wow.
think about and reason on your own. But I, it has helped me draw a lot of
Mhm.
conclusions about things I would not predicted, draw conclusions for. I think the cool thing for me is I'm not like I didn't go to school for agriculture. I mean, I have done courses in agronomy now, so I have at least the foundational understanding. But I've been able to see like these very
Mm.
unique combination of things that like I'm not exposed to, or I don't think anyone's kind of exposed to, and there is an inherent creativity in it, whatever the creativity might mean. But
Yeah.
it's taken like two randomly. Yeah,
So maybe to give it to,
sorry, what were you saying?
sorry, I was just curious if you could give us one or two examples of, you've given us one with the alternating, dry, wet, state. Is there, what were like one or two other things that you say that was really surprising, uh, and it has had a big impact? Like, what are some of the more surprising
Yeah, that's a
interventions,
good
maybe?
question. Mm. Yeah, I think the biggest ones from that would definitely be in the seed coding. I think that like for me, it's been like such a fun experiment to try and what things you can kind of put together that help improve the seed right off the bat. And at the beginning, when I started kind of looking at papers, like the LLMs and kind of suggestions it would give would be very like simple formulations, four or five things, like with, like the kind of classic things that you see in a lot of product formulations. But now, like, it's able to give me specific, very specific, like microbial, like specific microbes that could pair really well together. Um, and even like tie it to different, like, like these microbes lead to this thing down the line for the plant. And this
Yeah.
farmer is in Chiang Mai, which, for example, could be low in iron. These maybe not real facts, but like low in irons. This is what we'll
Mhm.
help with later. So I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
like it's been really interesting to see very contextual feed it understand things at the contextual level, because when you give it research papers about from like, for example, Chiang Mai University for agronomy, then it is using not just its full understanding of plant science, but also then very specific. It ties it into very specific things from your region as well. And I don't know, like you can just so I think
Right.
kind of pairing that together, like for us, like when we're kind of building out a seed coding product now, I think having that kind of extra knowledge of being like, this is like, like this, we have, like farmers in our area have problems with like slugs um, when they plant rice or snails, one or the other. But they're like, you can go back and kind of look at YouTube transcripts from different agronomists and products. And kind of a lot of these people have said that those issues are led by iron deficiency. So then we tested it. We were like, let's spray iron in our crops because we were having some slug or snail problems. I forget. But then we tested it and it worked. And I was like, well, they were using pesticides. Like people using hundreds of dollars worth of pesticides, and we solved it with like a $1 iron supplement at the planet. I was like, I don't like because like the iron deficiency leading to slugs or snails. This is one a totally different market with totally different crop in the US. And now it has been kind of able to give me the recommendation for it to use it in a wet rice environment in Thailand. Like that's, like that, the kind of
Right.
like for a human, I would have to go to the US, learn from, then come back and kind of apply it. Like it, it's interesting.
Totally. So, so this is super interesting to me because I think I think you said two things. On the one hand, you said, you know, it is able, and I see this is a huge advantage when you really have like, I mean, I guess it really is helped by the fact that there is a local
Mhm.
university in Chiang Mai, right, which is putting out papers, and then so you have like the
Yep.
local context, and then it's able to contextualize. Because one of the big issues with biostimulants
Mhm.
specifically, right? Is and then just in Planet Health overall is that everything is so
Mhm.
context dependent. Everything almost every
Yeah.
influences almost everything else. S- So having the ability to be like, oh, okay, I'm in that environment with this plant, with this kind of climate, and then that I see it as a huge plus. Now you just said something interesting as well, though. You said something, well, it's actually came from a totally different environment, but still, it worked for us. Like, um, I don't know. I'm just curious. Like, does the model? I guess the model. I guess is a. I don't know. My question is like, does it? So it
Yep.
works for both. So what you're telling me, and it's able to abstract from like, okay, that would probably only work locally, but this measure could work
Yeah, exactly, right?
globally. Is
I
that
think
how to think
it's
about it? Or?
it's it's interesting. I mean, you're definitely kind of have made a great observation. I think that's something that I was thinking about too. It's like this way for it to kind of pick and choose the information that it I don't know how it would know. I don't know. Actually, I don't know how LLMs work in much depth. Kind of being able to take information that is out of context and apply it to a different situation, but it also can take things that are in context, also apply. Like, I think both of those together have led to like a pretty interesting mix. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, it's I think the thing about regenerative agriculture now, kind of having like years of product building experience, is it's really, really hard to build products that work in every bioregion in from one company. Like, for us, we can build really good products for South Asia or Southeast Asia or the Asian market, because it kind of like you're stimulating different parts of the plant, and kind of like the concepts are kind of universal, but how you decide to build the product is really different. Um, and the application methods and things. So I think having technology that can understand when to apply something globally and when to be very hyper specific is a really cool advantage.
Yeah, because I was wondering also, like, now you have built this large database of all the papers and the ability to reason. You have actually even some local models that can they're both maybe more like they're mathematical models. You have this reinforcement learning pipeline that can sort of reason through or learn about these environments. Um, is there a reason you couldn't also develop products, I don't know, for Africa or for Europe and the US? And, how much work would that be? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about maybe selling it, or maybe, having almost like a SaaS
Yeah.
product or something? Because it seems like you've done a lot of the work.
Yeah, I
And
think that's a good question. I think it's a good question, and I don't really like have mental model for this at the moment. It's just like I feel like we've been able to tailor our research so much because we understand the kind of challenges like South Asian farmers have, like the constraints of a farmer having 4 to 5 acres, and kind of designing the research to be hyper optimized for a small space versus like building products for 1,000 to 10,000 acres in the West. Like the farms are much larger. So I think the fundamental approach to product design and research is so different. Like here, if you went to a farmer and said, I want in Asia, if you went to a farmer, you told them that you will build products to improve yields by 11%, you probably won't get as much response. But if you went to a farmer with 100,000 acres and you help them improve their margin by 11%, that will be an incredible business for them. So I think like the research here is so like we have to really think about 30-40% yield increases, because like that's for the farmer, that's an extra few $100s. So I think like we've kind of designed everything in a way where we're like really trying to fit as much into a bottle as possible. And that's what leads to good yield increases, rather than let's design a microbe that improves nitrogen efficiency on 10,000 acres. If that makes sense. I think that's just like such a separate task.
mm,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I see what
And
you're
the
saying.
nitrogen microbe one is a much more expensive task that might require a fully
Mhm.
billion-dollar lab to do. And the what we do is more cost
Right.
effective for the farmer and to kind of produce. But we have to source so much material to fit into one bottle that it's quite a different challenge. I guess if that like that's kind of like the approach of how we think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I get. I mean, I guess it comes down to whereas I guess I see two aspects. One is what I'm a little bit hearing through the lines potentially is, and I'm not sure this is true, but I would assume is that the yields, let's say in Europe or in the US, have been optimized
Yep.
very strongly with lots and lots of
Yeah.
research dollars and lots of experiments. So you would probably you're
Yeah.
starting at a higher level, and so optimizing is probably just like
Mhm.
more difficult from a starting point, right? Number one. And number two, you have this huge focus on like low cost and things that farmers can do either just for management practice or now the biosimilar products are developing like, simple things that they can apply. They're cheap
Yeah.
to source, easy
Yeah.
to apply, um, and get big increases. I would assume that I would still assume that some of the stuff you have in there, like just even that
Yeah.
database of all the papers, like I'd be surprised if the European
Fair.
farmers are doing all the
Yeah.
best techniques, but it might require some more customized wrangling through the data to find they could change. But I would assume like
Yeah.
soil health, the biomarkers you mentioned. I mean, these things will still apply to a large
Yeah,
extent, I would
I
assume.
definitely think so too. I mean, there's almost all of these are very universal. It's just how you decide to use the
Mm.
like each item itself that will change. Like I think like applying applying I don't know like silica to your plant is like all it's gonna be the same everywhere, but it's just how you formulate it into
Yeah.
the
Mm-mm.
context of your approach to farming. will change. But I think that there's some interesting things there.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
should yeah. I mean, I'll definitely think about it and see what we can kind of provide and build for other people. There's definitely a lot of interesting.
I mean, I just think I
Yeah,
would
for
love to
sure.
play with it, and probably there could be agronomists, and even people at the big companies like buyers and such that would at least
Yeah,
give it a look. I'm sure they have their own probably
I'm sure.
relatively sophisticated models, but you have built sort of this like LLM on steroids. I don't know. For me, like it's really one of the coolest applications I think of LLMs, where I think you're really on driving it to the frontier, right? So far I've seen like big productivity gains in
Yeah,
coding, in the legal space. I've seen like big advancements, probably customer service, but I haven't heard as much about, in farming. And it looks like you're probably at the cutting edge. I mean, it feels to me like you're at the cutting edge of like, combining different models and feeding it all these papers, reasoning, talking back to a mathematical model. I mean, it sounds really cool. Like I'm really, really impressed. And I'm always tinkering with
hmm
LLMs myself, but I haven't gone nearly as far as you have. So I don't know, maybe just to sort of like um once you get to an end here, like what's sort of the outlook is where like I don't know, what's next for roots? Like what's maybe the 10-year vision and maybe also touch upon like, LLMs, is that gonna be looks like it's already like a fundamental part. Are you thinking there's even more to be gained there? Like, yeah,
yeah,
tell me about what's your
yeah. I
long
mean,
term vision?
for us, I mean, it's always kind of been the North Star is to create like a sustainable agricultural environment for, like almost all farmland. I think it would be incredible to see a world where we have like, 100% farms and kind of all food has been kind of solved that way. And I think we can head there pretty quickly with like a lot of different companies being born in different parts of the world to take up different opportunities in each kind of climatic condition or kind of those things. And I think for us, it's like the long term vision is to get to a place where like we can create 5x yield improvements for farmers within like the same season. I think it would for me the big goal is to like give our farmer a product, and if they're growing 100 kilos of rice, they start growing 500 kilos of rice. And I think that like kind of would be kind of incredible to live in a world where like food security kind of can be solved in that way. I think that especially with like, us needing about like, I think 50 to 70% more rice by 2050 is kind of what we need for kind of the population that's increasing. So I think like within 25 years, we need to increase yields by 50 to 70%. So I think there is a huge kind of task for that ahead. But I think the wonderful, like the really great, the LLMs have kind
Yeah.
of come at the right time because I think for a small company like us, it would not have been super feasible to kind of do this research without a lot more money. Um, and the great thing about LLMs is it's extremely cheap. Like I probably spend a few $100s a month research and kind of get out tens of thousands of dollars, even more of research. I mean, I'm really excited for everyone to try it. I think they're getting even, like Chat GPT-01 is pretty awesome. That's like I think there is some cool stuff for what has happened in the like the programming industry, like Cursor and all of these really cool like um like kind of platforms. I hope that happens for agronomy and for farming too. I think that will be a big leap ahead. So I think that there's quite a lot of exciting work. And yet, yeah,
Yeah. It, it's so amazing. I think you told me in our previous call, you told me, you said that sort of there's a
oh yeah,
20-year delay, between like what farmers are doing and
yep,
what the research is. And I mean, the yield increases you mentioned, I mean, being able to go 5x or maybe even higher, just by, applying the right products and doing the right, management practices,
yep,
it's insane. So, having, yeah, like this
yeah,
agronomist in the box, that knows everything. And, as long as you have a phone at
absolutely,
this point, right? As long as you can somehow interact, I mean, it's,
yeah,
it's crazy. Like you think about it, and you get access with your phone to the
yeah,
entire like
human
corpus
research,
of like all the
yeah,
brains that have ever worked on agriculture,
absolutely,
basically, right? Distilled. And we had
yep,
Google search before, but you have to know the right keyword, and you have to like, now you could just, the questions, bring it back to like, okay, I have this plant in this field. What do I need to do next? Right. And like,
yep.
it tells you. I mean, it's a really
Yes. I
beautiful,
mean, it does like 90% of the
powerful
it does
vision.
ninety
And
percent of the
I,
thinking for you. Like you to do the 10%. Like it's quite okay to do the 10% of thinking.
yeah, super, super, super awesome. Yeah, I know this is a super fun conversation. Yeah, I can't wait to see, how Roots is growing and how you're taking it further. And, yeah, I mean, I'd love to catch up, maybe a bit down the line and see also, I mean, if you ever get to more at some point, maybe you get to talk a bit more even about, your different models and pipelines. Cause I really think there would be interest. Even I'm thinking even like different industries, right? Like people working on even, maybe batteries and other stuff, like just being able to have the most
Yeah.
cutting edge research and your
True.
fingertips
Yeah,
contextualized to your
absolutely.
problem. It seems like one of the most useful ways to,
Definitely.
uh,
Yeah.
make use of LLMs. And
Yeah, I
so,
mean,
yeah,
that's so exciting. I think that's if anyone's listening, I think that's probably one of the best startup ideas you could probably ever make. So I would start working on that.
nice.
Yeah, thank
Super
you.
cool, Abhi.
Well,
Thank you
thank
so
you for
much for
having
coming
me.
on the podcast.
This was
Best of
awesome.
luck. Uh, Best of luck with Roots, and we'll link Roots, in the comments and everything, and people make sure to check out Roots and follow Abhi, on the socials. And
Thank
yeah,
you. Thanks
thank
for
you so
having
much,
me.
and
Thanks.
talk to you soon. All right.